Okay, in this little lecture, we talk about who does science and why, and who can do it and who's it for. So, first thing you should know is that science is everywhere and it's done by everyone. Here are some examples as it goes crazy. Okay, now everyone kind of has their idea of what they think scientists is and what they do, and I'm here to tell you that maybe that idea is a little outdated. So. Science, we say, if you took the notes the other day, that it's defined as making observations, studying, and experimenting to find the nature of things. We learn about science because we learn about the world around us. So why do trees change color? Their leaves change color. Okay. Why does my chest hurt after I eat too much pizza? Okay, those are things that we learn that are science related, that we just ask questions about things that we are around us, inside of us, that we see and feel, and we want to have answers to them. When you think of a scientist, what do you think of? Okay, if you're like most people, you think of maybe white lab coats, maybe like in front of a computer, maybe they're staring into some sort of test tube, maybe they have some notebooks, maybe they're smart. There's all sorts of things that you think about. If you could name a scientist, some people might say like Sir Isaac Newton or Galileo or Einstein. And when you look at their pictures and when you think scientists, I think traditionally people tend to think of old white dudes. And I'm here to tell you that that is not often the case. And what has happened in the course of history, like many other fields, the old white dudes have taken credit for things that really developed by people that did not look like old white dudes. And so a lot of times their accomplishments are built on top of those things, and history tends to favor old white dudes. And so we tend to think of them as the scientists when in fact that's not always the case. Of course, I should say these guys are all super important. There's no way you could minimize their contribution to science. It's just that there are lots of other types of people doing science. So it's a myth that it's all old white dudes. There are, in fact, lots of other people doing really important things. Okay. Science is everywhere. People from all cultures have been curious about the rest of the world, the way the world works, since they could think. Okay, so like if you are, think about the first person who was like, I'm going to eat this apple. Okay, what happens when they eat the apple? If it tastes good and they feel good afterwards and it gives them energy, guess what? They are going to eat more apples. If they eat an apple and it gives them explosive diarrhea, well, then guess what? You're probably not going to eat too many apples. So that's like an experiment, right? When you're trying something and you're kind of recording the data, that is, you're finding out about the world around you. Many people have carried out these experiments. I just mentioned one of them. In addition, many people throughout history have experimented on how best to use the resources, whether it's like, how do I catch fish in this river? Or what are some things I can eat near here? All those are things that have been, science related since the beginning of time. In the field of astronomy, you people think Galileo, but in fact, people from all over the world were studying the night sky well before Galileo was. That's Galileo's middle finger. They saved it for some reason. You can see it if you want to. But here are some examples, like the Maya culture built observatories at many of their cities and aligned important structures with the movements of things that they found in space. In the 3rd century, Aristarchus of Samos, Greece, predicted the size of the Earth as well as the size and distance to the sun and moon using astronomical measurements. Again, that's well before Galileo. As early as 2650 BC, Li Shu was writing about astronomy. By 2300, ancient Chinese astrologers had sophisticated observatory buildings. Observing total solar eclipses was a major element in forecasting the future health and success of the emperor. This is thousands of years before Galileo, and Galileo typically gets credit for like what we know about space. But there are all sorts of cultures that were doing things with space. Agriculture. Today's agriculture is big business. If you drive not very far from here, you can find farms, and they're raising livestock, they're raising crops, and they're $1 million on each year spent on like how to best do that. But that's not always been the case. People in central Mexico developed corn at least 7,000 years ago. It's a combination of types of wild grasses, specifically teosinte. Evidence points to the Middle East as the area of the earliest planned sowing and harvesting of plants that had previously been wild. People had to understand and study irrigation, drainage, conservation, sanitation, all these things, science related, and you don't think about them because other people, old white dudes, get credit for what has happened over the course of history. In the field of medicine, the people who were studying medicine thousands of years ago, using things that they found nearby them to help cure headaches, backaches, fix cuts, that kind of thing. Native Americans used the leaf and bark of the willow tree to alleviate all kinds of aches and pains. Today, we know that willow bark contains salicylic acid, which is an ingredient that's found in aspirin. Okay, so they were using that thousands of years ago. Of course, it's not just men who are doing these. Women are making important and have made important discoveries in science. In the last 100 years specifically, 100 years ago, it wasn't very common. The biggest reason was that only men, the assumption that men could only do science. In reality, we know that obviously that's not true. Anyone can do science. One of the first women helped change that was Marie Curie. Maybe you've heard of her. She pioneered the study of radioactive elements, specifically radium. And at first, her husband got most of the credit for the research. It was later understood that she was the main force, and it led to 2 Nobel Prizes for her. So Marie Curie, who later actually died of radiation exposure, and has an element named after her on the periodic table. She was one of the first women to really make long strides in science. Xi Qi, the first empress of China, studied silkworms and devised a process to mass-produce silk in 2600 BC. That's a long time ago. And one of the most important pioneers in computer development was Grace Mary Hooper. Her best-known contribution to computing was the invention of the compiler that translates English language instructions to the language of the computer target. Bottom line is that science is everywhere. It's something that is done all the time by everyone. You don't have to be a lab or a fancy degree to science. You don't have to be an old white dude. Anyone can do science. Anyone in this class can do it. And you just need to spend some time critically thinking about the world around you.